They didn't knock. The door just opened, and they came through it together, two of them identical, moving in the particular synchronized way of people who have spent their entire lives as each other's only constant. They stopped just inside the entrance and stood there, small and very still, the way things stand still when they have been moving for a long time and have finally decided that here is far enough. Nadine Z looked up from the counter. She had been in Seoul long enough to stop being startled by most things. A work visa that took 8 months and cost her a relationship. A city that did not pause for anyone's homesickness. An old man who was not her grandfather, but who had given her a job and a counter stool and a bowl of soup every morning without being asked, without making a production of it, without needing a single thing back. She had seen a lot come through that door. She had never seen anything quite like this. They were maybe 7 years old. Identical down to the last detail. The same dark school uniforms, the same white shirts, the same careful posture, the same backpacks worn with the straps held just so. But it was their faces that stopped her. Not scared. Not lost. Serious. The particular seriousness of children who have learned to read a room before deciding whether to enter it. They were reading hers now, both of them at the same moment, the same dark eyes doing the same quiet inventory. Nadine set down her cloth. She pulled out 2 counter stools, side by side, and tilted her head toward them. No question, no interrogation, no performance of concern. Just the gesture. Come here. Sit down. They crossed the room together. The older-seeming one, she would learn his name was Minjun, sat first, setting his backpack beside him with a precision that felt long practiced. His brother Minjae followed, settled himself, and then, very quietly, his knee began to bounce beneath the counter. Nadine noted it and said nothing. She filled 2 glasses of water. Set them both down. Said in Korean, "You hungry?" Minjun looked at her, that same careful assessment, and then nodded once. Minjae watched his brother nod and did the same, a half beat behind, the way a shadow catches up. She got that response sometimes when she spoke Korean, the slight recalibration behind someone's eyes, the expression that said you are not what I expected. She had been taking it as a compliment long enough that it had stopped feeling like anything else. She ladled 2 bowls of doenjang jjigae from the pot, her daily special, her mother's recipe rebuilt from memory in a Seoul kitchen with whatever the market had offered that morning, faithful in spirit, if not always an ingredient. She set them down with 2 small plates of banchan alongside and went back to wiping the counter like the boys had been coming here for years. No fuss. No ceremony. Just food. Minjun looked at the bowl. Then at her. Then he picked up his spoon and ate. Minjae watched his brother pick up the spoon and did the same. In the far corner, old Harabiaji, 76 years old, owner of this small diner, the closest thing to family Nadine had on this side of the world, stirred from his afternoon nap with the slow precision of a man who woke from naps the way other people woke from surgeries. He opened one eye. Spotted the twins. Considered them for a moment, the way he considered most things, without rushing the consideration. Then he shuffled over in his slippers and placed a plate of sweet rice cakes on the counter between the 2 bowls, equidistant, without a word. Shuffled back. Sat down. Closed his eye. Minjae watched Harabiaji's retreating back. Something in him changed, not dramatically, not in a way you could point to exactly. His knee stopped bouncing. His grip on the spoon loosened. The particular tightness that 7-year-olds are not supposed to carry, the held-breath quality of a child who has learned that safety is not a thing you assume, just eased. Slightly. Enough. Minjun felt it. She saw him feel it. His shoulders dropped a fraction. In this small, warm room that smelled like fermented soybean and rain and whatever was simmering low on the back burner, something had been decided. Neither boy could have said what. They just knew the way you know certain things in the body, before the mind catches up. They settled into easy quiet. The rain on the windows. Harabiaji's soft breathing from the corner. The low, steady sound of the pot. Nadine found herself reaching for the wooden spoon, her mother's, hand-carved, carried from Douala to Seoul in a bag she had almost checked because of the weight, and holding it up. This, she said in Korean, is for stirring something slowly. Low heat. You give it time, the flavor builds. You rush it, it burns. Minjun looked at the spoon with great seriousness. Then at her. Slowly, he repeated, in careful, studied English. Like it was a word worth keeping. Exactly, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. Close enough that she filed it away like something she'd want later. She noticed things. The uniform crest, small and embroidered, the kind of expensive that doesn't announce itself. His shoes, polished to a finish that belonged in a different neighborhood. Minji's watch, understated, real, the kind of thing that cost more than her monthly rent and was worn without awareness on the wrist of a 7-year-old. These boys were not from this street. She said nothing about any of it. Just refilled their water. They had eaten most of their soup, Minjun methodically, Minjae in enthusiastic and slightly chaotic fashion, when Minjun's eyes moved to the window. And stopped. Nadine followed his gaze. 3 black cars had pulled up outside. Identical, expensive, the kind of vehicles that announced themselves through their silence rather than their sound. The kind that did not belong on the street and knew it and didn't care. Minjun's spoon went still in his bowl. His hands found the straps of his backpack and held them, both fists, the way he'd held them when he first walked through the door. Whatever had loosened in him over the last 40 minutes went very quiet again, the specific quiet of a child who has known a moment was coming and had been hoping, quietly, that it wouldn't arrive yet. Beside him, Minjae stopped eating, looked at his brother, read something in his brother's face, and set down his spoon. The door opened, and Nadine's entire understanding of the afternoon rearranged itself completely and permanently. If this already has you, stay with it. We are just getting started. The man who came through the door was not loud. He didn't need to be. He was tall and lean, long black hair falling loose around a face that was angular and absolutely still, the kind of stillness that does not come from calm, but from years of deciding that showing nothing is safer than showing anything. His collar was open enough to reveal the edge of tattoos climbing his neck. His suit was black and perfectly fitted and probably cost more than Nadine made in 2 months. He moved like a man who had not been surprised by anything in a very long time and did not expect to start today. 3 men came in behind him without being told. They positioned themselves door, window, back wall, with the automatic precision of people who had done this so many times it had stopped requiring thought. The temperature in the room dropped. Mr. Kwan, who had occupied the same window table every weekday for 9 years, who had outlasted 2 landlords and 1 difficult divorce and never once left his rice unfinished, folded his newspaper, placed it on the table, and went entirely still. Harabiaji opened both eyes. Nadine did not move. She stood behind the counter with one hand still resting on the pot and watched this man fill the doorway of her small, worn diner like he had stepped in from an entirely different world. Because he had. His eyes swept the room once, twice, quick, precise, the sweep of a camera that misses nothing. Then they found the twins at the counter. For 1 fraction of a second, 1 single beat that Nadine almost missed because she was watching for the wrong thing. Something moved across his face that had nothing to do with power or control or whatever it was that made an entire room forget to breathe when he entered it. Relief. There and gone before she could be sure she'd seen it. He crossed the room. Every step deliberate. He crouched down to the boys' level, to both of them, turning slightly between them, and his voice when he spoke was low and quiet and meant only for them. His hands moved briefly over each of them. Checking. Confirming. The hands of a man who has been afraid in one particular way for a long time and is verifying, once again, that the thing he feared has not come to pass. Both boys answered him. Minjun in short, careful sentences. Minjae in shorter ones, watching his father's face. Then Minjun turned and pointed directly at Nadine. The man straightened, turned, looked at her. Nadine looked back. She did not know who this man was. She had no context for the cars outside or the 3 men currently occupying her walls or the fact that Mr. Kwan appeared to be attempting to become structurally part of his chair. She had only instinct, and every instinct she had was firing all at once. She held his gaze anyway. She was from Cameroon, and she had been raised by a woman who did not look away, and she was not going to start now. He reached into his jacket, placed an envelope on the counter between them. It made no sound. It landed with weight. Nadine did not touch it. For a moment, neither of them moved. The diner was so quiet she could hear the rain on the glass, the low simmer of the pot, the sound of her own breathing. Then he took a hand of each boy, rose, turned, and walked out. No explanation. No introduction. No acknowledgement that she was a person who deserved either. The three men followed. The door closed. The black cars pulled away from the curb like they had never been there at all. The silence that remained was enormous. Mr. Kwan picked up his newspaper with hands that were not entirely steady. Harabiaji had not moved from his chair, but his eyes were on Nadine with an expression she had never seen him wear before. Something careful. Something that sat very close to worry. Nadine stared at the envelope. Then the door. Then Harabiaji. He let the silence sit the way he always did, like silence was a language he had been fluent in for a very long time, and there was no point rushing someone who was still learning it. Then, quietly, that was Kang Tae-hyun. The name meant nothing to her. She told him so. Harabiaji looked at her steadily. Everyone in Seoul knows that name, Nadine. Something in the way he said it, not dramatically, not with any theater, just flat and factual, the way you say the weather is cold or the river is high, made something in her chest ring like a struck bell. She picked up the envelope. Opened it. The number inside made her set it back down. Pick it up again. Set it down. Who is he? She asked. Harabiaji was quiet for a moment. He picked up his tea. He looked at the two empty counter stools, the two small plates of half-eaten banchan, the two water glasses with the rim marks where small mouths had pressed. The kind of man, he said slowly, whose sons you do not want to be the last person who fed. If you're already feeling this story, hit that subscribe button right now because we are just getting started. The diner stayed perfectly still long after the black cars disappeared into the rainy street. Harabiaji's warning hung in the air, cold and heavy. Nadine looked down at the envelope Kang Tae-hyun had left on the counter. It was thick. She reached out and picked it up. It felt too heavy for just a meal. Slowly, she set it back down. A few minutes later, she picked it up again, just to move it safely beside the cash register. The rest of her shift felt like a dream. The rain never stopped, washing down the windows while Nadine wiped the same spotless counter over and over. That night, Nadine sat alone in her small apartment. The envelope rested on her kitchen table, still unopened. Outside, the city was loud and bright, but inside her room, it was completely quiet. She pulled her laptop toward her and opened it. The glow of the screen lit up her face. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then, she typed the name, Kang Tae-hyun. She pressed enter. The search results flooded the screen. She read the first few lines, snapped the laptop shut, and sat in the dark for a long moment. She took a deep breath. Then, she opened it again. The news articles used careful words, but the truth was clear. The Kang Syndicate. 3 generations of deep, untouchable money and power. The stories painted a picture of a son who took over the family business at 31. In just 7 short years, he had made himself more feared than his father had been in 25. He was a man who moved quietly but ruled absolutely. And at the bottom of a smaller article, she found the detail that made her chest ache. He was a widower. He had twin sons. Nadine closed the laptop. She didn't turn on the lights. Instead, she thought about Minjun holding his spoon so carefully, and Min-jae finally relaxing his bouncing knee in the warmth of her diner. She sat alone in the dark room, wrapped in the specific silence of a woman who had already made up her mind and was simply waiting for herself to catch up with it. 3 days went by. The diner smelled like hot broth and rain, just as it always did, but Nadine kept catching herself looking at the 2 empty counter stools. She noticed the small, matching scuff marks on the metal footrests where 2 pairs of shiny shoes had rested. The quiet in the diner felt heavier now. She called her cousin Beatrice back home in Yaoundé. Beatrice picked up on the first ring. What happened? She asked, hearing the heavy pause in Nadine's voice before she could even finish her first sentence. Nadine couldn't find the right words to explain it. That evening, just as Nadine flipped the sign on the door to closed, a man walked in. He wore a perfect gray suit. He had a pleasant, easy smile, the kind that belonged to a man who never needed to raise his voice to get exactly what he wanted. He set a thick folder on the counter. Mr. Kang would like to make you an offer, he said softly. He listed the details smoothly. She would move into the Kang family estate. She would be a live-in companion and tutor for the twins. She would receive free room and board and a very generous salary. Then he added one last detail, stating it as simply as if he were talking about the weather. And protection. For you and for anyone you care about. That last word landed differently than the rest. It felt like a warning and a promise all at once. Nadine crossed her arms. I'm not a nanny. The corner of the man's mouth twitched into a tiny smile. Mr. Kong is aware of that. He is not looking for a nanny. He is looking for whatever it is you are. Nadine stared at the cream-colored folder. I'll think about it. After the man left, she sat with Harabiaji over cups of hot tea. The folder sat on the counter between them. The old man looked at the folder, then at her, and finally took a slow sip from his cup. You already know what you are going to do, he said quietly. Nadine looked at the two empty stools. That night, she called Beatrice again and told her she was taking the job. Beatrice was quiet for a long moment before she said 4 things. Are you serious? Be careful. Call me every single day. Then she took a deep breath. And Nadine, don't disappear into someone else's world. Nadine almost promised. But as she looked out her window at the dark city, she was not entirely sure she could. She packed one practical bag. Inside went her mother's recipe notebook, its corner water-stained from an old kitchen mistake she never talked about. Next one a small, hand-carved wooden spoon. It had belonged to her grandmother, then her mother, and had survived 3 countries and 1 terrible airline. Leaving it behind was simply not an option. At the diner, Harabiaji handed her a wrapped container of warm stew for the road without being asked. When she hugged him goodbye, he held on a second longer than usual. Sunday lunch, he told her softly. Every Sunday. Nadine climbed into the waiting black car. She watched the diner get smaller and smaller in the rear window until it vanished completely. When they arrived, the Kang estate did not look like danger. It sat beside the wide, gray, slow-moving Han River. The house was built with clean lines and tall glass windows, surrounded by a beautiful garden that someone had cared for with real love. But the high stone walls, the hidden cameras, and the guards pretending to look relaxed told another story. The person who built this place understood the difference between a home and a fortress and had tried to make it both. Inside, a head housekeeper named Mrs. Yoon met her. She stood with a perfectly straight back, handing out strict rules with a blank, neutral face. Nadine decided the older woman was still making up her mind about her. Nadine had been in her pristine new room for exactly 11 minutes when she sensed a quiet presence outside her door. She opened it. Minjun and Minjae stood side by side in the hallway. They had their backpacks on and their hands resting flat against their sides. Minjae was watching his brother closely, waiting to follow his lead. Minjun looked up, his face very serious. Are you ready to start? He asked in slow, perfectly practiced English. Nadine tilted her head. Did you practice that? A tiny pause. Yes, Minjun said. Both of us. Nadine laughed. It was a big, loud, real laugh that bounced off the clean white walls and had absolutely no business being in such a serious hallway. The twins jumped in perfect unison. Then, the corner of Minjun's mouth curved up. Seeing this, Minjae smiled too, but his was wider and brighter, reaching all the way to his dark eyes. Come on then, Nadine said. Both of you. Let's find the kitchen. The kitchen quickly became their entire world. Nadine taught them English through cooking, giving them words like season, fold, rest, and bloom. The twins learned in completely different ways. Minjun was careful. He filed each new word away and used it later in perfect, surprising sentences. Minjae was fearless. He used new words immediately, tossing them into completely wrong sentences with so much confidence that Nadine always knew exactly what he meant. Every morning, she found 2 drawings slipped under her bedroom door. Minjun drew like an architect. He sketched the kitchen from above, placing every jar perfectly and carefully outlining Nadine's hands on a pot. Minji's art was a colorful, happy mess of giant heads and wide arms. When he pointed to a bright yellow blob and called it soup, Nadine told him it was beautiful. I know, he replied simply. She pinned their pictures to her wall in an alternating pattern until the white paint disappeared and the room finally felt like home. As the days passed, Minjun spoke more freely, discovering that words gave him better tools than silence ever could. Minjae started to sing. It was a soft, tuneless hum under his breath. Nadine heard it for the first time while he was washing vegetables at the sink, unaware she was standing in the doorway. She closed her eyes and tucked the sweet memory away, knowing she would carry it for a very long time. One rainy afternoon, the three of them stood at the counter with their elbows touching, working on the same batch of dough. Without looking up from his sticky hands, Min-jae spoke into the quiet. "Our mom used to let us help in the kitchen." Min-jun went completely still beside his brother. Nadine didn't stop moving her hands. She kept kneading the soft dough, keeping her voice light and steady. "What did you make?" A short pause hung in the air. Then, both boys answered at the exact same time. "Juk," said Min-jun. "Egg rolls," said Min-jae. They blinked, turning to look at each other. Suddenly, Min-jae laughed. The joyful sound broke out of him like bright sunlight bursting through a cracked window. Beside him, Min-jun smiled, and it was the truest, most real smile Nadine had ever seen on his face. She just pressed her hands deeper into the dough and let the magic settle, knowing some moments survive best when you don't point at them. Kang Tae-hyun began to appear at the kitchen entrance. For times, to be exact, though he never actually stepped inside. The first time, Nadine was alone. She was stirring a pot and talking to herself, the way she always did when she cooked. Low heat, no rushing, she murmured to the simmering broth. "You cannot hurry the thing you want to last." When she looked up, he was standing in the doorway. His face held an expression she had never seen before, like a man standing out in the freezing cold, looking through a lit window at a warm fire he had forgotten he was allowed to want. Their eyes met. Without a single word, he turned and walked away. The second time, his presence felt like a sudden shift in the weather. Nadine didn't look up. She was busy refereeing a very serious debate between the twins over whether egg rolls were a main dish or a side dish. "You're both right and you're both wrong," she told the boys gently. "That's what makes it interesting." Min-jae accepted this instantly. Min-jun thought about it for exactly 4 seconds, then nodded in agreement. When Nadine finally glanced at the doorway, it was empty, though the air still felt heavy with the fact that he had been there. The third time, Min-jae spotted his father before she did. The little boy froze for 1 sharp second. Then he turned back to the counter, his face suddenly completely blank and far too composed for a 7-year-old. The fourth time, Nadine was leaning against the counter, talking on the phone with Beatrice. She was laughing a loud, real, unguarded sound. When she turned and found Tae-hyun watching her, the laugh didn't cut off in panic. It just finished naturally, fading out like the end of a good song. He stared at the stove. "What is that?" "My mother's recipe," she said. "Pepper soup. Adapted for Seoul. You want some?" The casual question surprised him. His dark eyes widened for just a fraction of a second before his cold mask slipped back into place. "No," he said, and walked away. Over the phone, Beatrice's voice crackled. "Was that him?" "Don't," Nadine warned. "I'm not saying anything," Beatrice replied softly. "I'm just saying that you laugh like that." Nadine said nothing, and they both knew exactly what that silence meant. Nadine woke up at 2 in the morning. The house was perfectly still, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was the specific kind of silence that meant something in the house had changed. She slipped out of bed and opened her door. Both twins were sitting on the floor in the hallway directly across from her room. Their backs were flat against the wall, and their knees were pulled tightly to their chests. Their shoulders were exactly touching. They weren't just sitting close to each other, they were pressed together, like two children who knew that when everything else in the world was scary, having each other was the only safe thing left. Their eyes were wide open and dry. Their faces were completely blank, caught in that frozen space where someone wakes up from a terrible nightmare and just waits for their heart to trust that they are safe. Nadine didn't ask what they had dreamed about. She didn't ask if they were okay. She simply crossed the hall and sat down on the floor right between them. Leaning her back against the wall, she started to hum. It was her mother's song, a soft, steady tune without a name. It was the kind of song meant for a dark kitchen in the middle of the night, when someone small just needed something real to hold on to. She felt Min-jae move first. He leaned his weight against her arm very slowly, testing her warmth, like stepping on thin ice to see if it would hold. A moment later, Min-jun shifted. He was slower and much more careful, measuring the distance before finally resting his head against her other side. Nadine stayed exactly where she was. She didn't make a big deal out of it. She just kept humming in the dark. That was how Kang Tae-hyun found them. He had walked down the hall because he knew about these nightmares. He expected to find what he always found, his son sitting alone against the wall, trapped in a cold hallway full of sadness he didn't know how to fix. Instead, he stopped at the end of the corridor and saw both boys fast asleep against Nadine's arms. For the first time, their little hands rested loosely in their laps. Nadine's soft humming floated through the dim light. Tae-hyun stood there for a long time. His face was not cold or powerful. He didn't look like a boss who made entire rooms freeze in fear. He just looked like a tired, grieving father. He watched this woman give his sons the exact comfort he didn't know how to give them. It hurt, but not in an angry way. It was a quiet, heavy feeling that lived right between thankfulness and deep sadness, a feeling with no real name. Without making a sound, he turned around and walked back to his room. He did not sleep for a very long time. The feel of the house changed. Nadine noticed the shift before she could even name it. There were more guards at the gates. Conversations in the hallways stopped a second too quickly when she walked by. Mr. Shin, the representative, moved through the house with a sharp new focus, though his pleasant smile never changed. Nadine watched him carefully, remembering her grandmother's warning, "No one is that perfect, baby." That much control always hides a secret. Kang Tae-hyun disappeared for a day and a half. Nadine worked hard to keep the twins' world feeling warm and perfectly normal. They had kitchen lessons and English practice. Under the watchful eyes of security guards, they played in the garden, where Min-jae spent 20 minutes explaining his newest drawing to her with absolute seriousness. Later that afternoon, Nadine was walking down the quiet east corridor. Min-jun had slipped away from their lesson early, and she was looking for him. As she passed the closed door of the private study, she heard voices. Low, tight, and serious. She froze. "The Jaesung network is moving faster," she heard Tae-hyun say. His voice was flat and hard. Suyun's accident was not an accident. Someone in this house gave them her route. Then came Mr. Shin's voice, terribly calm. "We are close to confirming who." Nadine stopped breathing. She took one slow step backward. Then another. Heel to toe. On her third step, her elbow clipped the decorative vase sitting on the hallway shelf. Time slowed down. The vase tipped over the edge. Nadine reached out with both hands and caught it just a half second before it smashed against the floor. But the soft thud of the heavy ceramic against her palms was just loud enough. The voices inside stopped completely. The door opened and Tae-hyun stepped out. He found her standing there, holding the heavy vase in both hands, her face frozen in panic. "Miss Nzi." His voice was perfectly smooth. "I was looking for Min-jun," she said. She didn't know how she kept her voice steady. "Min-jun is in the library," he replied. A heavy silence hung between them. He knew what she had heard. Mr. Shin was standing just inside the room, listening. "Go find him." She held his dark gaze for 2 long seconds. And Miss Nzi, his eyes dropped to her hands. "Put that down before you break it." She placed the vase back on the shelf. She turned and walked away, forcing herself not to run. Once she was safely around the corner, she pressed her back against the cool wall and closed her eyes. She let out a long breath, like she had been trapped underwater, and finally reached the surface. She stared at her shaking hands, took a deep breath to make them stop, and went to find the twins. For 2 days, a wrong kind of silence settled over Nadine's life. A bedroom door she knew she had closed was left wide open. Her phone moved a few inches on her nightstand while she slept. A window latch she always locked was found completely undone in the morning. She said nothing to anyone, but her grandmother had taught her to keep eyes in the back of her head. She paid sharp attention. Then came the morning she reached for the kitchen utensil jar. The small wooden spoon her mother's, and her grandmother's before that, the one thing she would never leave behind, was not where she had put it. Tucked neatly inside the carved bowl was a tiny, folded piece of paper. Nadine opened it. "Smart women know when they've seen too much. You seem smart." She read it twice. Real fear hit her, cold and complete. But right behind the fear came a deep, clean anger. She was raised in a kitchen in Douala by a strong woman who set her jaw and kept moving when life got hard. Nobody touched her mother's spoon. She got dressed, marched across the estate, and knocked just once on Taehyun's study door. She opened it before he could answer. Taehyun looked up. Whatever he was about to say died the second he saw her face. Nadine walked straight to his desk, set the wooden spoon down, and placed the open note right beside it. "Someone put that inside my mother's spoon," she said, her voice completely steady. "Where else was I going to bring it?" Taehyun read the note. His usual frozen calm suddenly shifted into something else, a dangerous, electric stillness, like a storm trapped inside a room. He looked up at her. "Sit down, Miss Nzi." She sat. And for the first time, Kang Taehyun truly talked to her. There were no walls, no professional distance. He explained how his suspicions had been building for months. Her note was the final piece of the puzzle he needed. He admitted he had been watching her closely since the diner, making sure she was safe. She had never been as alone in this house as she felt. Nadine looked at him. "Did you know what you were asking me to walk into?" A long pause stretched between them. "I knew what I hoped you were," he said softly. "I did not know what you would have to face." It wasn't an apology, but it felt more honest than one. She nodded. "Mr. Shin?" Taehyun held her gaze. "Will be handled tonight." Nadine understood. Some things in this world happened just like the weather. You didn't need to know exactly how the storm worked to know it had finally passed. By nightfall, Mr. Shin was gone. A quiet relief settled over the estate, and even the guards seemed to breathe easier. In the hallway, Mrs. Yin passed Nadine with a new look, not quite a smile, but a clear nod of respect. That evening, all four of them sat at the dinner table, and no one rushed to leave. Taehyun sat without his usual heavy armor, looking like a man who had finally set a heavy weight down. Minjun gave a very serious review of the soup, pausing to tell his brother to rest, using the exact tone Nadine used in the kitchen. Minjae immediately yelled, "Bloom," for no reason at all. He started to laugh, which made Minjun laugh. Soon, both boys were giggling loudly, filling the room with the joyful noise of children who finally remembered they were allowed to take up space. Taehyun watched them, and a real, warm smile crossed his face. He looked up at Nadine. She looked back. Neither said a word, but they both knew. Late that night, they sat in the quiet kitchen with 2 mugs of tea. The Darkhan River sparkled outside the glass. He asked about her mother. Nadine told him about her kitchen in Douala, the rich smell of Sunday meals, and the wooden spoon that had survived 3 moves. She explained how cooking a loved one's recipe was a special kind of grief, because food remembers even when you can't. He listened closely, giving her his full attention. Then, she asked about Suyin. He shared small, true things, how his wife used to hum, how Minjun had her quietness and Minjae had her laugh. "This house has held its breath for 18 months, he said softly. "They hummed in the kitchen last week," Nadine told him. "Both of them." "I know," he replied. "I heard." A comfortable silence wrapped around them. Then his phone rang. The dangerous world outside was still circling. He stood up, walked to the door, and looked back. "Stay inside tonight." Their eyes locked, holding the weight of every shared look and quiet midnight talk. "I know," she said. After he left, Nadine sat alone. She remembered her cousin's warning not to lose herself in someone else's world. But she wasn't disappearing, she had arrived. Her mother always said the best things needed low heat and patience. Nadine smiled. She was choosing to stay. Finally, she was home. And that's a wrap on today's story. If this one pulled out something in your chest, then let us know in the comments. Tell us your favorite moment and where you're watching from. And if you're new here, welcome. Subscribe so you never miss a story. Like this video so more people find it. We'll see you in the next one. Please support by subscribing and commenting what you enjoyed about the story and where you're watching from.